Let me tell you something. You ever wonder how a country once chained down, once mocked, once labeled developing, like it was some polite insult, could rise from that label, tear it up, throw it into the wind, and replace it with something so powerful? The world now adjusts its clocks to its heartbeat. Let me tell you the truth, the raw, uncut, unfiltered truth of how India, a land of colors and contradictions, didn't just become powerful. It earned every drop of it. It clawed for it. It bled for it. It prayed for it. It dreamed it into reality. Because behind the temples and towers, behind the slums and skyscrapers, there are untold secrets. Secrets that don't sit in textbooks. Secrets no analyst can predict. Because power, real power, don't show up on a spreadsheet. It shows up in the soul. Now listen. India's journey wasn't a glow-up. It was a fight, a fire, a furnace of struggle that turned coal into diamonds. And every time the world said, "You can't," India said, "Watch me." You see, when you look at India today, its economy skyrocketing, its satellites dancing in the sky, its students coding futures that rewrite the rules of the digital age, you might think it happened overnight. You might think somebody handed them a manual called How to Get Rich and Respected in 10 Easy Steps. But that ain't it. No, sir. This story ain't cute. It's not clean. It's not calm. It's gritty. It's uncomfortable. It's real, and it starts not in power, but in pain. Because the first secret, it's pain. India's power didn't grow from power. It grew from poverty. You see, when you're down bad, when your back's against the wall, when your people are eating dust, and your history's written in chains, you got two choices. You can break, or you can build. And India built. It built through British occupation, through partition, through famines and floods, through silence and screams, through every heartbreak that could have turned it bitter. It chose better. That pain birthed purpose, and let me say this. Purpose is the second secret. See, you can have money, you can have tech, but if you don't have a reason, you're just rich and bored. You're just another country with a nice skyline and a weak spine. But India had purpose. Purpose ain't pretty. Purpose is when a village kid studies under a streetlight with no shoes on, dreaming of the stars. Purpose is when a mother skips her meal so her son can afford a bus ticket to college. Purpose is when a nation says, "We will no longer rent our future to others." Purpose is fireproof. That's what India had, still has. But then comes the third untold secret, and it's something the world underestimated for too long. Intelligence, not the kind that wears a suit and speaks Oxford English. No, I'm talking about ancestral intelligence. I'm talking about a country that gave the world the number 0, then flipped that 0 into billions in software exports. I'm talking about the land of Aryabhata and Srinivasa Ramanujan, the minds that calculated time when the rest of the world was still guessing seasons. Don't play with that kind of genius. It's embedded in their DNA. It's not imported, it's inherited, and intelligence alone. It's like a sword with no hand to hold it. That's where the fourth secret kicks in. Adaptability. You throw a curveball at India, it doesn't dodge, it dances with it. Whether it's colonization, globalization, digitalization, India learns. It doesn't copy, it adapts. You take away the factories, it gives you IT hubs. You outsource jobs, India ensources innovation. You push it into a corner, it turns the corner into a command center. Then there's the fifth, youth. Man, let me tell you something about India's youth. There are more young people under 25 in India than the entire population of many countries. And they're not sitting around waiting for permission. They're building apps at 16, launching startups at 19, running billion-dollar unicorns by 30. You can't stop that energy. You can't even contain it. It's like lightning in a bottle and the cap's already off. But even youth burns out if there's no culture to ground it. That's the sixth secret, culture. You want to know how India became powerful. It remembered who it was. While the world was busy losing itself in trends, India held on to its traditions like a lifeline. From yoga to Ayurveda, from Bharatanatyam to Bali, Wood India didn't just preserve its culture, it exported it. It didn't let globalization wash it away, it made sure it flavored globalization with a little masala. And don't think this is just about spiritual chants and spicy food. Culture ain't soft power. It's the deepest form of strength. Because when you know where you come from, you can walk into any room, any board meeting, any battlefield and never shrink. You carry your roots like armor, and that's what India did. Now let's talk about the seventh untold truth. Strategic patience. And listen, this one's powerful. Because while other countries flexed muscle and fired shots, India played the long game. It waited. It watched. It didn't react, it responded. It didn't just build alliances, it studied patterns. When the world zigged, India zagged. When the economy crashed, India pivoted. When others panicked, India paused. That patience wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. And don't get it twisted, while India was patient, it wasn't passive. That brings us to number 8, indigenous innovation. This is the part they don't teach in Silicon Valley seminars. While the West was selling software for dollars, India was designing solutions for rupees. You know what kind of genius it takes to make things work with less. You know what kind of mind turns scarcity into strategy. India didn't wait for the perfect tools. It made its own frugal innovation. Low-cost tech, high-impact science. You ever hear of the Mars mission that cost less than a Hollywood movie? That wasn't luck. That was legacy. And speaking of legacy, here comes the ninth force. Unity in diversity. Sounds cliché, maybe, but let me break it down for you. India ain't one story. It's 1,000 stories told in 22 languages and written in hundreds of dialects. It's a billion dreams trying to speak to each other without a translator. And somehow it still moves forward. That's not chaos. That's choreography. That's not disorder. That's democracy on hard mode, and they're doing it every single day. Now, most people stop there. 9 secrets. They think that's the whole recipe, but the 10th is where the magic is. The 10th is faith, and I ain't just talking religion. I'm talking belief in themselves, in tomorrow. In something bigger than GDP and global rankings, India believes. It believes in karma, in destiny, in hard work, in grace, in grit, in 1 billion people waking up every day and saying, we may not have it all, but we got each other, we got hope, we got fight left in us. That kind of belief. That's not just powerful, that's unstoppable. So when you ask me, how did India become so powerful? Don't look at the missiles, don't count the millionaires, don't scroll through the headlines. For decades, India was seen through a limited lens. The world labeled it as a service provider, an outsourcing hub, a back-end office, a place where customer care and coding came cheap and fast. The brand was fixed, smart, affordable, hardworking, obedient. That image became a ceiling. While the Indian brain powered Silicon Valley, India, the nation, was expected to stay in the background. The hands that built billion-dollar apps weren't supposed to demand their own seat at the table. The minds that cracked algorithms were never meant to question who authored the rules. But something changed, and it wasn't about money. It wasn't about technology. It was a shift in identity, a seismic psychological reset. The realization that India wasn't just meant to support the world. It was built to lead it. This mindset shift didn't happen on the news. It happened in the silence of long nights, in the frustration of gifted graduates watching their ideas get stolen by venture capitalists overseas, in the restlessness of a generation no longer content with good enough. Slowly, the youth began to ask, why not us? Why are we always building someone else's dream? Why is India always serving, never commanding? That one question triggered a movement. It wasn't organized. It didn't come with a manifesto. It came from the soul. A soul that had carried centuries of being conquered, controlled, categorized, and had finally had enough. India started telling a new story. It wasn't the story of call centers and code factories anymore. It was the story of a people who remembered they came from kings and sages, not just service contracts, and with that memory came momentum. Young entrepreneurs stopped waiting for the West's approval and started launching global products from Indian soil. IIT graduates no longer saw Silicon Valley as the promised land. They saw home as the headquarters. That confidence was contagious. You could see it in boardrooms, in policy meetings, in classrooms. No more inferiority complex. No more hesitation. A new generation came with a different question. Not can we do it, but who's going to stop us? The results started stacking up. India wasn't just building apps. It was building ecosystems. Fintech platforms like UPI transformed the daily lives of hundreds of millions. Digital identity systems like Aadhaar redefined what access and inclusion meant at scale. And these weren't just domestic revolutions. The world began to notice what India was building wasn't just working. It was working better than anything seen before. The West started to study what India created. They called it a miracle, but it wasn't magic. It was a mindset that refused to beg for validation, a mindset that didn't need foreign textbooks to define intelligence, a mindset that saw innovation not as luxury but as survival, and that mindset was dangerous to the status quo. Because the moment you stop asking for a seat at someone else's table and start building your own, the power dynamic flips. India stopped chasing. It started choosing. This was most evident in how India started to handle its diplomacy, its defense, and its domestic policy. The tone changed. You could hear it in the voice of Indian diplomats, measured, calm but firm. India wasn't apologizing anymore. It was articulating. It wasn't reacting. It was setting the narrative. At global forums, India began talking like a leader, not a listener. Not a country waiting to be told what to do, but a country that would do what needed to be done, with or without applause. This confidence carried over into defense. India had always maintained a defensive posture. A quiet power, but the mindset shift flipped the switch. The country started asking, why are we always responding? Why are we always preparing for a future shaped by others? So they changed the playbook. India launched its own defense startups. It developed homegrown missile systems. It tested new generation tanks, drones, satellites, and submarines, all made in India, designed by Indians for Indian strategic needs. This wasn't aggression, it was assertion, it wasn't escalation, it was evolution, and through all this, one thing became clear. India's identity was no longer just economic, it was psychological, it was emotional. It was spiritual. The transformation wasn't about GDP numbers or stock markets, though those were rising. It was about how people saw themselves. Parents stopped dreaming of their children leaving the country. They started dreaming of their children leading the country. Young Indians stopped idolizing global CEO and started aiming to become them without ever crossing the border. And most importantly, for the first time in a long time, the world stopped looking at India with condescension and started looking at it with caution and respect. This new India didn't just rise, it refused to bow. It didn't need someone else's permission to be powerful. It didn't need to shout to be heard. It just moved, it acted, it built, and in doing so, it forced others to adjust. Countries that once ignored India began knocking at its door. They wanted partnerships, they wanted trade, they wanted India in the room not as an afterthought, but as a force. It's not that India became arrogant. No, that was never the goal. The country's strength has always been in its balance, its ability to be humble but not weak, wise but not naive, ambitious but not reckless. That balance became its superpower. While others overextended themselves in conflict, India invested in capacity. While others borrowed vision from foreign consultants, India looked inward and found clarity in its own people. You could see the transformation even in the smallest details. In the way small towns started launching startups. In the way women in villages began using smartphones to sell handmade products globally. In the way students from Tier 2 cities began winning international hackathons and leading global climate discussions. These weren't isolated incidents. They were signs of a nation that had stopped looking outward for identity and started looking inward for power, and that inward power created outward shockwaves. India's global image transformed from emerging economy to indispensable partner. Its voice mattered on climate change, on digital governance, on cybersecurity, on trade. No decision could be finalized without factoring in the Indian perspective, and that wasn't because of geography or military might alone. It was because of a mindset. A mindset that saw India not as a resource, but as a reference, not as a worker, but as a writer of the new world order. That's why this mindset shift matters more than anything else, because real transformation isn't just external. It's internal. It's the moment a person, or a country, looks in the mirror and says, I am not what the world told me I was. I am what I decide to become. India decided, and that decision rewrote its destiny. It reshaped its posture on the world stage. It changed how it invests in education, how it treats its entrepreneurs, how it engages its scientists, soldiers, and storytellers. What used to be viewed as support functions are now core drivers. What used to be exportable labor is now uncontainable leadership. India no longer sees itself as a junior partner in the global equation. It sees itself as a nucleus, and you can't ignore a nucleus. You can't suppress it. You can't outsource it. You have to align with it, or fall behind, and this transformation didn't come easy. It came through disappointment, through disrespect, through decades of being overlooked. But sometimes being overlooked is the best thing that can happen to you. Because while the world was sleeping on India, India was awakening. While others were laughing, India was learning. While others were dominating, India was designing. And when it finally stepped into the light, it didn't come empty-handed. It came with strategy, vision, and something far rarer. Self-belief. That self-belief is the true secret. Not just what India built, but what it believed while building it. The understanding that it didn't have to follow to matter. It could lead, that it didn't have to borrow greatness. It already had it. All it needed was to remember, and once it remembered, it started rising, not as a servant to the system, but as an architect of the future. That's what a mindset shift does. It doesn't change how others treat you. It changes how you treat yourself, and that, in turn, changes everything else. Look at the 12-year-old girl biking 8 kilometers to school because she believes her education can change her family's fate. Look at the rickshaw driver who invests in a second-hand smartphone so his son can learn coding online. Look at the farmer building solar panels out of scrap so his village can see light after sundown. That's power. That's India. Power is not a throne you inherit. It's a summit you climb barefoot, bleeding but never breaking, and India's still climbing higher, faster, wiser. So the next time somebody questions India's place in the world, you remind them, power doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait to be noticed. It rises, quietly, relentlessly, and when it arrives, it doesn't knock, it walks in like it's always belonged. Because maybe, just maybe, it always has.